There are rules. We are nothing if we do not abide by the Assassin's creed. 3 simple tenets, which you seem to forget. I will remind you. Stay your blade
from the flesh of an innocent.
The second tenet is that which gives us strength. Hide in plain sight. Let the people mask you such that you become one with the crowd. Do you remember?
We must walk the streets freely, seen but unseen. You too must learn to blend like us and become one with the city's crowds.
Never forget the tenets you have sworn to uphold.
Hide in plain sight.
Hide in plain sight.
Hide in plain sight. These are the words spoken by our ancestors that lay at the heart of our creed. Let these tenets be branded upon your mind. Follow them to be uplifted. Break them at your peril.
We work in the dark, serve the light. We are assassins. Rise, assassin.
I think back on that opening scene between Al-Mualim and Altair in the original game a lot. Al-Mualim is not only putting Altair in his place and reminding him of the tenets and rules an assassin must follow, but he's also telling us for the first time as players what being an assassin in Assassin's Creed means. What they are, how they do what they do, and what they value. Altair, as a result of his natural skill, talent, and being the youngest Master Assassin in the Creed's history, believes himself above these tenets. He kills the innocent man, he exposes himself before striking, and he leads the Templars back to Masyaf Castle, directly causing the deaths of his brothers. To make matters worse, he doesn't even seem to show much remorse for any of it. He doesn't even see that what he did was wrong. So Al-Mualim forces him to start over and rediscover what it is to be a member of the Brotherhood, as we as players came to discover it for the first time. Don't kill innocents, don't compromise the Brotherhood, and never purposefully expose or draw attention to yourself. Be a mere blade in the crowd, hide in plain sight. It's that second tenet I want to focus on for this video. This tenet and the idea of hiding in plain sight is a fundamental pillar of an assassin's identity and how they operate. This is as much represented in the narrative as it is in gameplay. The player exercises the second tenet in gameplay through the use of social stealth, a catchy term Jade Raymond, one of the 3 original creators of the series, used to describe these hiding in plain sight mechanics. Whereas in traditional stealth, you'd stay hidden by avoiding the gaze of an enemy or hiding in the shadows, in social stealth, you're hidden right before their very eyes, seen but unseen. The idea that if you behave and act in a socially acceptable way in public view, you are invisible, just another face quickly forgotten in a sea of people, acting so ordinary that no one would think twice about whether or not you belong there. In the original Assassin's Creed, this translated into the ability to blend with groups of monks and scholars dressed in a similar white attire to Altair's robes, while he'd mimic their actions in order to appear as one of them. The other variation of this was blending on a bench. By sitting between 2 civilians on a bench in the streets, Altair would become invisible to any enemies searching for him. This implementation may be a little less realistic, as the white robes and hood kind of stick out like a sore thumb when he's not with a group of similarly dressed people, but it's not too difficult to suspend that disbelief knowing it's a video game and just looks and feels cool. While these blending mechanics aren't very deep, they're core to the experience of Assassin's Creed 1 and carry heavy thematic significance to what an assassin in this series is. So, I have a little confession to make. I wrote this little intro about a year ago now when the news first broke that social stealth would be absent in Assassin's Creed Shadows. I felt like with the possibility that it may be abandoned going forward in the series again, it was important to talk about what social stealth is and why it belongs in Assassin's Creed. I ended up putting the script on the back burner and procrastinating it for a long time, but I still think this is a very relevant topic for Assassin's Creed right now, and there's still no guarantee that social stealth will come back. I mean, it probably will if I had to bet, but even if it does, is it going to see any improvement from its previous iterations? I wanted to further dive into what social stealth brings to Assassin's Creed and how it makes it unique, while also taking a big picture look at the franchise to see the evolution of social stealth, or rather lack thereof, throughout the series, and some possible solutions to make it better if and when it comes back. There are tons, and I mean tons, of games and game series out there where you play as some type of stealthy killer that lurks in the shadows and stabs people in the back. Whether it's thieves, assassins, hitmen, spies, or ninjas, there are endless games with stealth elements in them. Assassin's Creed has every opportunity to be unique and different from those games, with the potential social stealth has as a foundational pillar of assassin gameplay, but it consistently squanders it. Like Patrice Désilets said, unfortunately social stealth isn't popular nor trendy, so the series has had no interest in investing in it as a core part of the Assassin's Creed experience again. But really, it's what makes the assassins in Assassin's Creed distinct from all the other stealthy killers in video games, aside from maybe the robes and the hidden blade. Assassins don't just hide in the shadows, they hide in plain sight. Not to mention, social stealth gives NPCs more interactivity and importance as opposed to being mere set dressing. It's one thing to have a world densely populated with NPCs to give it this sense of life and busyness, but it's another when you can actually take advantage and use that within gameplay. Not a lot of games do that and allow for that type of interaction, going even just beyond social stealth in the original Assassin's Creed games where how you actually moved through crowds and around people mattered, with the gentle push and tackle mechanics. I miss having that level of interactivity with crowds and NPCs in these games, and I always felt there was an opportunity to push it even further. They had something here. Social stealth has always had so much potential to be more than it was in Assassin's Creed. With it carrying such thematic importance to the identity of an assassin, it should have received a lot more focus and progressive iteration in these games. Really, past Assassin's Creed 2, there was very little change to how social stealth in Assassin's Creed worked. They gave up on trying to improve it, and eventually decided to just abandon it, then bring it back, still not improve it, and abandon it again. The big change Assassin's Creed 2 made coming off of the original game was allowing you to not just blend with a group of similarly dressed monks, but with any civilian NPC. So long as there are two nearby, you can effectively become invisible to enemy detection, kind of like a moving haystack. This made crowd blending more viable and less situational, with the trade-off of it looking far less believable, as a man dressed in bright white and red robes and an entire arsenal of weapons on his belt completely stands out in a group of civilians. If anything, crowd blending like that would realistically draw more attention to Ezio, not less. And this has always been a critique of crowd blending in Assassin's Creed, but I've always made the argument that the trade-off of having this mechanic is worth it, even if it's not totally believable. It's a game, it's Assassin's Creed. I was always able to suspend my disbelief because crowd blending just flat out looks and feels cool to do. It's a huge part of the assassin fantasy. Plus, the little gray filter over Ezio and the NPCs he's blending with does help sell this idea that he doesn't visually stand out to the guards. However, I do agree that what you're wearing should impact how NPCs perceive you in social stealth, which is one of the ways I think they could go about adding some more depth to social stealth in the future, which I'll delve further into later. With the ability to blend with civilians, this makes crowd density far more important though. In fact, I made a whole video on this topic a while back, but if people are actually going to use social stealth in crowd blending, they need to be encouraged to do so. There has to be large forming crowds to blend with in the open world and individual missions for crowd blending to feel useful and encouraged. While sure, it looks and feels cool to do, not many people are going to use the mechanic if it doesn't actually provide an advantage. This is a big issue Valhalla and Mirage had with its iterations of crowd blending. So there needs to be ample crowd density within the world to support blending, and there needs to be missions designed with social stealth in mind, where it's an actual viable strategy to completing a mission. What would be the point of slowly moving from crowd to crowd and blending on benches if you could easily blitz your way through the mission and complete it that way? Assassin's Creed 2 and the Ezio trilogy as a whole is pretty good with this. There's missions clearly designed with social stealth in mind, there's plenty of groups of civilians to blend with in the open world, and it introduced the ability to hire factions where you can create your own blending opportunities and divert attention off of yourself by sending them in to distract guards, which can be extremely useful, especially during the many tailing missions where you need to stay within sight of a target but not be seen. Another new mechanic in AC2 that I don't think people use very much but falls under the social stealth umbrella is being able to throw coins for NPCs to flock over and pick up. That way, you're getting other people to act socially abnormal, while you're not, drawing the guards' attention to those people instead. A pretty cool inverse of the assassin's social stealth philosophy. Instead of you blending by acting like everyone around you, instead make everyone around you act strange to take attention off of yourself. That's another possible way they could look to expand social stealth in the future, by adding more ways for us as players to manipulate crowds of people into doing something socially abnormal. After AC2, Brotherhood and Revelations don't add much new in the way of social stealth, which makes sense since those games were really more about polishing, making quality of life improvements, and refining the already existing gameplay formula of AC2 than making big sweeping additions and changes. Really, the only somewhat significant change is Ezio will automatically walk at the same speed as NPCs he's blending with, which is a small but nice quality of life improvement, since it could be a little awkward and janky trying to jam yourself into a crowd of people and keep up or slow down with the exact speed of their walking. This way, it's easier and more consistent to stay in a crowd blend. Those games didn't really expand on social stealth in any meaningful way, but at least it was still a core pillar of stealth, and still had plenty of missions and an open world designed with it in mind. The same can't really be said for Assassin's Creed 3 though. Obviously, AC3 brought a big shift in really everything for the series, from tone to gameplay, setting. A lot of people love AC3's combat and find it more enjoyable than the stealth mechanics, and to be fair, the game pushes for a more aggressive combat style than the previous Assassin's Creed games did. Traditional stealth doesn't even feel like much of a priority for AC3, let alone social stealth. You can't hire factions anymore, and it's harder to find substantial crowds to blend in with in the streets of Boston and New York. In the frontier, you can obviously forget about it. The cities have wider streets, and NPCs are so scattered and spaced out, making the mechanic feel obsolete at times. However, AC3 did add the ability to start riots, giving you a larger crowd to blend with, while simultaneously drawing any nearby guards away from their post, along with some missions, particularly in Haytham's portion of the game, designed around blending and eavesdropping. Assassin's Creed 3 also has a lot of new unique blending animations, where Connor and Haytham will perform different actions to blend with their environment, like leaning against a wall or sitting on a fence or barrel, actually communicating with the groups they're blending with on several occasions. There's a lot of really cool animations, and riots can be useful in limited situations, but beyond these small changes, AC3 really had no interest in trying to expand on social stealth or put it at the forefront of gameplay. However, its little spin-off game, Liberation, did. Liberation is one of the few AC titles after AC2 that actually tried to improve social stealth and make it a focal point, which is kind of sad considering it's not even a main title in the series, but it mainly did this with its persona system, which for my money is the best part of the entire game. Evelyn has 3 different personas she can equip to adapt and better blend with the specific environment she's looking to infiltrate in the different societies of Louisiana. She can dress as a slave, a noble lady, or as an assassin, each providing different benefits and disadvantages. In her assassin attire, she mostly functions like a normal Assassin's Creed protagonist, full range of motion, every weapon and tool easily accessible. However, she can't crowd blend and is always notorious since the guards are aware of what she looks like. so you really have to be careful to avoid detection when roaming the open world. The lady persona helps Evelyn blend with the higher society at fancy balls and banquets. She only gets access to her hidden blade, blow darts, and smoke bombs with this persona, and she can't jump, climb, or sprint. But this is the most incognito of her disguises. She still can't crowd blend, but notoriety fills up the slowest as the lady. She can charm gentlemen to lure them into a location to either steal or assassinate, and she gets the perfect social stealth weapon with a blowgun concealed inside of an umbrella, subtly poisoning people with a couple inconspicuous movements and then watching them fall to the ground as nearby guards fail to understand what even happened. The slave persona has full range of motion and quick gaining notoriety like the assassin persona, but allows Evelyn to infiltrate and blend with slaves by working or carrying crates, meaning she can blend in ways other than simply crowd blending or sitting between two people on a bench, like in most Assassin's Creed games. And this is the only persona where she can do those regular forms of blending as well, as her outfit doesn't stand out nearly as much as the assassin and the lady. Evelyn has a way into all levels of society and adapts to what the situation calls for. This is really the only Assassin's Creed game where what you're wearing actually impacts how the world and NPCs react to you. There were some really interesting and promising ideas with this persona system and liberation that contributed quite a bit to social stealth and the Creed's second tenet of hiding in plain sight, but unfortunately those additions began and ended with liberation, as Black Flag and Rogue more or less followed in the footsteps of AC3. Like AC3, social stealth wasn't a priority for Black Flag, which, to be fair, actually makes sense considering Edward is a pirate, not an assassin for a majority of the game, even though he still plays like an assassin and can do all the basic social stealth actions. Unlike some other games in the series where you don't play as an assassin and don't have any social stealth mechanics at all. But obviously a game where you spend a large chunk of time on a ship or on lots of different isolated islands isn't going to be great for social stealth. However, in the larger cities like Havana, Kingston, and Nassau, it's still fairly viable thanks to the crowd density and reintroduction of hiring factions you can blend with from the Ezio trilogy. A lot of people praise Black Flag for being able to meld the feel of a pirate game with an Assassin's Creed game very well, and while it's certainly not the best game for social stealth in the series, it still manages to make it feel more prevalent and useful than some of the recent AC games that tried to accomplish a similar marriage of player fantasies. And then, to no surprise, Rogue is very similar in that you spend a lot of time on a ship in more sparsely populated areas, but still having a couple big cities like Albany and New York, with substantial enough crowds for blending to be effective within those areas. And even though Shay is a Templar, he was of course trained as an assassin and continues to operate like one throughout Rogue, so it makes plenty of sense that he would still be hiding in plain sight and using crowds in the environment to his advantage when possible, the final mission at Versailles being the perfect example. Which is a nice segue into what many consider to be one of the best games for social stealth in the entire franchise, Assassin's Creed Unity. This is less so because of any new mechanics or additions to social stealth, and more so because of Unity's crowds and black box assassinations. Unity by far has the largest and densest crowds of NPCs out of any game in the series. This makes the opportunity for crowd blending in Unity quite plentiful, and it can feel incredibly atmospheric moving through a raging crowd on the streets of revolutionary Paris. It's also a little easier to believe Arno could blend with these people because of all the chaos and violence. A guy walking through a crowd in a hood with a sword on his belt doesn't actually look too out of place in the French Revolution. Being able to blend within the open world is one thing though, it's another when you have black box assassinations that present social stealth as a primary strategy to reaching a target, like Unity occasionally does. There's a few assassinations with these massive crowds to provide you with safe cover to get within striking range of a target. In the Latouche assassination, you can just walk through the crowd, throw on disguise, and stroll right up to Latouche and kill him in an instant. And there's a few other missions designed with these large crowds that can provide you with an advantage. But as immersive as the crowds look visually, they're very stationary, so crowd blending in them isn't as useful as it could be. The only real way to manipulate a crowd into moving to an area you'd like is by throwing coins, which can work somewhat well, and I like how they even added a blending animation of Arno pretending to pick up the coins like everybody else, but it would have been far more useful if there were more ways to maneuver these large crowds of people into an advantageous position. I think back to some of those gameplay demos from Unity's marketing campaign, where they showed the ability to inspire crowds to actually rush at and attack guards, and that would have been perfect, but of course that never actually ended up in the final product. None of these mechanics are new though. Crowd blending, sitting on benches, throwing coins, is all stuff that's been there since AC2. Unity's new addition is Disguise, which is originally from the Assassin's Creed multiplayer modes, that allows Arno to temporarily take the identity of a targeted NPC with an animus hack. If you sprint or do any sort of high-profile action like an assassination, sprinting, climbing, or just get too close and stared down by a guard, it'll burn the disguise. It takes the idea of blending with your environment and acting socially acceptable very literally. It's kind of Hitman-esque with an animus spin. I like the idea of the mechanic. Disguises are one of the clearest ways for the series to expand on social stealth. I just never really liked the aesthetic of it. I get it's an animus hack, but it kind of shatters immersion seeing Arno shapeshift into another human being with the press of a button. If it was a more realistic implementation, like Hitman's disguises, that might have been more welcome, but this mechanic was immediately dropped in Syndicate anyway. Instead, Syndicate replaced it with kidnapping, which similarly can look a little silly, the way you just hold the NPC's arm to get them to comply and make yourself completely inconspicuous, but it's actually very strong and useful. Far more than the crowd blending is in this game, especially in those black box assassinations. Syndicate doesn't have nearly the same NPC density as Unity. The streets of London are far less cramped and narrow, so it's not as easy or practical to blend, and you're not going to find as many large forming crowds as Revolutionary Paris, even though this game does still have a good amount of NPCs throughout the city. Furthermore, the act of blending itself is a little more difficult in Syndicate, since NPCs will get angry with you for just standing there blending in with them. Which is more realistic. I mean, I'd feel weird too if I was talking with some friends and then some random dude in a top hat just walks in, stands there and doesn't say anything.
Kill only vandals. Think they own the street. No respect for other people. I hope they fall over and dash their brains on some well-placed rock. Hey, give us some breathing room. This cannot be tolerated.
And you'll get a similar reaction for bumping into them. For those who were always bothered by the believability of crowd blending while wearing dripped out assassin robes and stocked up with visible weapons, Syndicate, like Liberation, is more believable in that regard. As Jacob and Evie have concealed weapons, many of their outfits are a little more standard for the time and don't stand out nearly as much, though I guess that can still change if you decide to wear like Ezio's or Xiao Yun's outfit anyway, and they only wear their hoods when crouching. So if we're talking from a pure realism standpoint, Syndicate's social stealth is one of the more realistic iterations of the series, but that doesn't exactly mean it's more practical and fun. They even removed the ability to throw coins that had been there since AC2. To be honest, I don't think many people used it anyway, so it's not like that's a major loss. And kidnapping is really what social stealth is all about in this game in particular. And to be honest, it's a mechanic I'd like to see return at some point. It's very disappointing to see social stealth get so little attention and very few changes though, from its second iteration in AC2 to at the time its last in Syndicate, as Origins and Odyssey would choose to abandon it completely. From a gameplay standpoint, Origins is basically a total reset for the series. Pretty much everything was recreated from scratch, meaning many features and mechanics that had been in the series for years were stripped back or omitted completely. Social stealth being one such casualty. Now, the Origins team did apparently try to implement it, but claimed it didn't work within the game's different systems. Not exactly sure what that means, but with Origins NPC density, social stealth may not have been very useful anyway. And many people can justify its absence narratively because Bayek isn't an assassin, and the hide in plain sight tenet of the creed hadn't even been established yet. Even though that's not the real reason the developers chose to forego it in the first place, and kind of feels like a convenient excuse to have missing features from the game that had been in the series for a decade at that point. And there could have been a point in either the base game itself or in one of the DLCs where Bayek learns social stealth and how to blend, to show us the origins of hiding in plain sight. After all, they showed us the origins of the first tenet, Don't Kill Innocents, in the Hidden Ones DLC, so if they wanted social stealth in this game, they probably could have found a way to make it work. But if Origins didn't have social stealth, it's not surprising in the least that Odyssey continued that trend, as Odyssey really had no interest in providing an assassin player fantasy. I'm not opening that whole can of worms about whether that's a good or bad thing in this video. I'm just saying objectively that's not the kind of experience Odyssey was trying to provide, and so it's no surprise that social stealth wasn't on Ubisoft Quebec's list of priorities. By the time it finally returned in Valhalla, social stealth had been absent in the series for 5 years. However, when it came back, it was quite different. Valhalla at its core was a Viking player fantasy, but they were also still trying to appeal to the old, long-time fanbase with some returning legacy features. The Hidden Blade was back, even with the old Assassin's Creed 1 sound effects. The Hidden Ones and Order of Ancients served a role in the story. Jesper Kyd was back to compose an Assassin's Creed soundtrack for the first time since Revelations. And of course, one of the biggest selling points to longtime Assassin's Creed fans in the game's marketing, the grand return of social stealth. There was a very clear, conscious effort to appeal to fans old and new with Valhalla, but its version of social stealth is very different from the rest of the series, and ultimately disappointed a lot of people. Social stealth in Valhalla is built around distrust areas, where you have to put on a hood and cloak, walk slowly, while trying not to get too close or let any guards stare you down as they can detect you. You can't crowd blend with any NPC, only designated groups, not unlike AC1. You can lure drunks to have them cause a scene and create a distraction so you can then slip past guards, which can be occasionally useful, and there's lots of different types of blending activities, whether it's working on a task or the classic bench sitting. Ultimately though, the biggest problem with Valhalla's social stealth is it's kinda boring and very situational. It feels like something that was put in a game that wasn't really designed for it, just to make fans happy. And don't get me wrong, social stealth could be kinda useless in some of the other AC games at times, but not nearly to this extent. Walking slowly and trying to face away from enemies isn't very fun. All the blending opportunities, while the animations look really cool and there's lots of variety to them, they're all entirely stationary, and it's rare for enemies to move towards you while you're doing these stationary blending tasks, unless you whistle at them. There's very few opportunities for crowd blending in this game, and again, it's super contextual because the monks have a scripted path. So once you get past the few guards they walk by, they're useless, and you can't just blend with anybody anymore, so you'll end up crowd blending like maybe a few times in an entire playthrough. There's only a few missions in the game built around social stealth, so it hardly feels like a core part or focus of the gameplay experience. More often than not, if you want to use it and feel like an assassin, even though you're not one, you'll have to go out of your way to do it because it's hardly effective in this game, especially when there are easier, quicker ways to complete or move through an area. Valhalla tried to accomplish a similar balance of assassin and Viking player fantasies, like how Black Flag did with pirates and assassins, which it didn't achieve in my opinion. As the assassin ways to play, such as traditional and social stealth, feel like they received a lot less attention and emphasis opposed to the Viking ways to play with combat and raids. Luckily, social stealth wasn't just abandoned again though. Well, not yet anyway, as Mirage aimed to try and bring it back to its old status as a pillar of assassin gameplay, a feat it achieved with some varying results. Mirage's marketing was centered around this return to roots for the series, and obviously a big part of the series' roots was social stealth, so it had to be a priority. And Mirage's iteration of social stealth is far more in line with what the series had from AC2 to Syndicate. You can blend with any civilian NPC again, so long as there's a few of them in the vicinity. Factions to hire for special distraction or blending opportunities are also back. However, they work a little differently than they did in Black Flag and the Ezio trilogy. You can't just hire them, have them follow you wherever you want, or have them distract the exact enemy you target dynamically like in the old games. Instead, they're in fixed locations where they serve a predetermined purpose in either attacking/distracting a nearby group of guards, or walking on a set path through a restricted area for you to blend with them. They can still certainly be useful for some missions and certain designated areas within Baghdad, but in a far more limited and restrictive context. Baghdad as a city is pretty well designed for social stealth, since it's very dense with bustling, narrow streets, lots of benches to blend on, and they even brought back bench assassinations. But kind of similar to Valhalla, guards don't really move around much in the open world, so it's rare to sit on a bench and have a guard walk past you for an assassination opportunity, unless you whistle them over to you. The NPC density is solid in this game, although NPCs don't travel in groups and crowds nearly as much as the old games, making crowd blending within the open world a little challenging sometimes. Your default movement in Mirage is also a jog, not a walk like the old games, so trying to solely walk to blend with the crowd can feel janky. The game does automatically slow down your movement and have you match the same speed as the NPCs you're in a blend with, which certainly helps, but you'd feel a lot smoother if you had more fine-tuned control over your movement like the pre-Origins games did. Another old system Mirage brings back is notoriety. Notoriety always kind of went hand in hand with social stealth in the open world, because if that meter fills, guards will start detecting you and free roam on the streets, encouraging the use of blending and hiring factions to avoid their gaze. There wouldn't be nearly as much use to social stealth in free roam without notoriety. The only reason Valhalla was able to do it was because it used distrust areas. Furthermore, NPCs in Mirage can actually point you out to guards if your notoriety is high enough, or if you try to steal from them, for example. And blending can be very useful when trying to avoid those deadly bounty hunters that show up when you reach max notoriety. Sort of like Unity, Mirage has some missions that encourage the use of social stealth. Black box missions like the Al Ghul assassination, the Grand Auction, and the House of Wisdom have ample opportunity for social stealth, with crowd blending, sitting on benches and eavesdropping, and wearing disguises. Those are my favorite missions of the entire game, and I wish there were more like them. Mirage brought social stealth pretty close back to what it was in the series beforehand, which, as we already discussed, could have and should have received a lot more focus and attention in those games. But at the very least, Mirage was a step back in the right direction for social stealth, and making hiding in plain sight an important pillar of Assassin gameplay again. I remember at the time being excited about the prospect of them only expanding and improving upon this foundation in future titles. That excitement was quickly crushed when I saw that social stealth was yet again being abandoned in Assassin's Creed Shadows. For Shadows, Ubisoft Quebec was all about prioritizing traditional light-based stealth, akin to the Splinter Cell games. And to the game's credit, I think Shadows has some of the best traditional stealth mechanics of the series. But it's all about hiding in the shadows, so hiding in plain sight just wasn't a part of the vision. I had a comment on my Shadows review saying something along the lines of, hiding in the shadows is kind of the same as hiding in plain sight. And I get what that person meant, because you can technically hide right in front of people without them seeing you, but that's actually the opposite meaning. Hiding in plain sight means you're entirely visible to an enemy's view, but they don't really see you or notice you, because in the case of social stealth, you're acting like everyone else around you. By hiding in the dark, the shadows, you're concealed, you're hiding somewhere the enemy can't physically see you, so that can't be hiding in plain sight. Again, if we go back to that original scene of Al-Mualim lecturing Altair, that's not how he describes the tenet.
Hide in plain sight. Let the people mask you such that you become one with the crowd. Do you remember?
Even though Naue is technically an assassin, she has the hidden blade, she has some of the outfits, truly from a gameplay perspective and really a narrative one too, she feels a lot more like a shinobi than a traditional assassin. She was raised as a shinobi, didn't even know what the assassins were for most of her life, and she was never taught to hide in plain sight and use social stealth, which is a big part of how assassins in the Creed operate. She's an assassin in title, but really more of a shinobi in her fighting style, and that's just the route they went for Shadows. But I'm not gonna lie, it was frustrating to me to have finally gotten social stealth back after its absence in Origins and Odyssey, just for it to be gone almost immediately again, and still never see it reach anywhere near its full potential. There's still one more version of social stealth in Assassin's Creed I haven't mentioned yet, and it unironically may just be the best of the series, and that's the Brotherhood through Black Flag multiplayer. These multiplayer modes are built entirely around social stealth. In a variety of game modes, you and other players select a character and are dropped in a map full of similar looking NPCs, and have to either hide or pursue those players by blending with the crowd, wearing disguises, and trying to act like an NPC to not stick out and draw attention to yourself, all while attempting to determine where the other real players are and avoid or assassinate them. It was incredibly fun and the perfect utilization of social stealth. You have to be very self-aware of your actions and how you might appear to other players. Sprinting, parkouring, or just moving irregularly is going to give yourself away immediately. It's a far more stimulating challenge knowing you have to fool real people by acting socially acceptable than just some incompetent, unaware NPCs. And equally, being observant, picking out a real player from the crowd, and getting the drop on them is extremely satisfying. Unfortunately, most of the multiplayer servers are down these days. The only one still up is Black Flags, and I can actually still find some games for it here and there on PC, but I would kill for a modern version of this multiplayer in Assassin's Creed. I know there's a new multiplayer game on the horizon, but from the sound of the leaks, it doesn't seem like it's going to be anything like these social stealth-centered modes. But these multiplayer modes show the potential of what social stealth could be in Assassin's Creed, and some possible solutions to make it far deeper and engaging than it has been in the single player throughout the course of the series. For one, what you're wearing should matter when it comes to social stealth. It could be like the more inconspicuous you dress and less visible weapons you have on your character, the more you blend in and are less suspicious to guards, while dressing like a knight in shining armor with a sword on your back makes you immediately suspicious. That way, when customizing your character, you have to consider the pros and cons about what will make you blend in versus what will be powerful to use. If you want to be that blade in the crowd, equip nothing but a hidden blade and maybe some plain looking rags, or if you don't care for blending, then stock up on some heavy armor and a bunch of weapons. To me, that's one of the most obvious ways they could go about fleshing out social stealth, placing more importance on appearance and connecting it directly with customization, so the player has some agency over how much they want to blend in. I think the other obvious way to add to social stealth would be to do more with disguises. The series has used disguises here and there throughout, like Unity's disguise mechanic, or in some of the games where you put on a disguise for a specific mission to be fully incognito, but they could easily take that further. Again, you look at Hitman, which is really the only other big social stealth-based franchise out there, where you can take out and use different NPC disguises to move through restricted areas at will. But it's not simply take a disguise and you've suddenly got free access everywhere, since you need different disguises for different parts of the level, and some higher ranking NPCs will still see through your disguise and recognize you don't belong there anyway. I'm not saying Assassin's Creed needs a disguise system exactly like this, but some more freedom and opportunity to use disguises would be welcome, rather than just a couple missions where the game gives you a disguise and you're just invisible throughout the whole level. It's way more engaging when, like Hitman, we're left to our own devices and have to formulate a plan to steal and wear a disguise ourselves. And then there'll still be some wrinkles and risk that you can get detected even with one on. Another game I think Assassin's Creed could look to as an example, ironically enough, was a game that was being developed by Ubisoft before it was eventually scrapped and completely redesigned, and that's the original concept for Splinter Cell Conviction. For those that don't know, in 2006, Ubisoft unveiled Splinter Cell Conviction for the first time, and it was completely different from the game that ended up releasing 4 years later, as it was essentially a social stealth game. Only they didn't call it social stealth because the first Assassin's Creed that invented the term hadn't even come out yet. But the whole idea was you'd play as a fugitive Sam Fisher, on the run, where you'd complete missions by blending with the environment and creating diversions to move through these sandbox levels, with an emphasis on hand-to-hand combat and the ability to pick things up in your environment and use them as weapons. It was kinda like this weird blend of modern-day Assassin's Creed and Hitman. Sam even wore a hood like it was Assassin's Creed. It was a very cool idea, but very different from what Splinter Cell had been, so it's not much of a surprise that it was met with mixed reactions and scrapped. However, I would personally love an Assassin's Creed game like this. A game focused entirely around social stealth with these open sandbox levels. That would fit Assassin's Creed really well. I don't think Ubisoft would ever do it, since it would obviously be missing the open world component that appeals to this broader audience they want to cultivate. But even so, there were some things this game was going to do that Assassin's Creed could implement, like more ways to create distractions and diversions to draw people's attention so you can slip by them unnoticed, or giving NPCs more intelligence and awareness. You could crowd blend and follow people in this game, but if you did it for too long, they would catch on and confront you, just adding a little more depth and challenge to standard crowd blending. Another way they could expand on social stealth is right there in the name. Give us ways to talk ourselves in and out of situations and persuade people. Let us be more social. There could even be some type of speech or persuasion stat with its own skill tree and abilities or something. And finally, I briefly mentioned it earlier, but we need more ways to manipulate crowds of people to our advantage. Whether it's starting riots or tricking them into flooding a designated area, a large crowd can only be so useful when it's entirely static, they need to be more fluid and dynamic for it to reach its full gameplay potential. These are just some possible solutions that would, in my opinion, add some much needed depth and engagement to a pillar of the Assassin's Creed gameplay loop that's always been left pretty neglected in these games. But social stealth would actually have to come back for that to even be a possibility to begin with, of course, which isn't a given. I think it will come back at some point just because of the fan demand for it, but there's no guarantee that will be anytime soon. Based on the limited information we know about the new upcoming AC titles, they don't exactly sound like games that would make social stealth a priority. The Black Flag remake might be a good bet, since after all, the original had it, but from the sounds of it, that remake is going to be far more similar to the RPG games, so I wouldn't say social stealth is a given in that game either. And that's still only half the issue. The other is, assuming it does come back, will it see any improvement or attempts at improvement from its past iterations, or will it continue to feel like something that's just tacked on and not given much thought to keep old fans satisfied and not making videos like this one? I believe social stealth should always have a place in Assassin's Creed given its narrative importance and the unique approach it brings to Assassin stealth gameplay, because again, not many games do that. It's something the series should be embracing and leaning into further, whereas of right now it feels like the complete opposite. You have something unique that could really set Assassin's Creed apart from all these other generic stealth action games. But I feel like I'm just yelling into the void at this point. One day, brothers, I hope one day we will be blades amongst the crowds again. Thank you for watching.